Good evening, I'm David Hale. We are interrupting all scheduled programming to bring you breaking news of an unprecedented global development. Within the last 11 minutes, every nation on Earth has simultaneously announced the immediate and indefinite closure of all international borders. We're talking about a coordinated action involving 195 countries executed within a 2-minute window. Sarah Donovan is here with me in the studio as we work to understand what's happening. Sarah, initial reports are still coming in, but the scope of this is absolutely staggering.
David, I don't think any of us were prepared for something like this. We're seeing images from airports across the world where passengers are stranded, flights are being turned around mid-journey, and families are being separated without warning or explanation. The human cost of this decision is already becoming apparent. I'm looking at footage from Heathrow Airport in London where thousands of travelers are demanding answers that no one seems able to provide. The confusion and fear on people's faces is heartbreaking.
Let me give you the facts as we know them at this moment. At approximately 6:47 p.m. Eastern Time, government officials from nations including the United States, China, Russia, the European Union member states, Japan, India, Brazil, Australia, and every other recognized nation issued identical statements. The language was virtually the same across all announcements: immediate border closure, no exceptions for diplomatic personnel, no humanitarian corridors, and no timeline for reopening. Commercial aviation has been grounded internationally. Maritime shipping has been ordered to return to ports of origin or the nearest friendly harbor. Land borders have been sealed with military personnel.
We need to talk about what this means for real people right now. There are an estimated 4 million travelers currently in transit or stranded in foreign countries. That's 4 million people who went to bed last night in their hotel rooms or boarded planes this morning with no idea they wouldn't be going home. Students studying abroad, business travelers, tourists, people visiting sick relatives. And David, we're hearing reports of parents separated from their children, couples divided across borders, and elderly travelers with medical needs who are now stuck without their medications or support systems.
The coordination required to pull off something like this is extraordinary from a logistical standpoint. We've reached out to contacts at the Pentagon, the State Department, and intelligence agencies. No one is providing clarity on the decision-making process that led to this. What we do know is that military assets have been mobilized at borders worldwide. The United States has deployed National Guard units to the Canadian and Mexican borders. We're seeing similar military presence at the French-German border, the border between Poland and Ukraine, and dozens of other crossing points that have been open and peaceful for decades.
I want to read you a message we just received from a viewer named Margaret Collins, who's watching from Toronto. She writes, "My daughter is in Barcelona on her honeymoon. She called me crying 20 minutes ago saying they went to the airport and were told all flights are canceled. She doesn't speak Spanish. She's scared. Why is this happening? Please, someone tell us why." David, that's the question everyone is asking right now. Why? What possible threat or circumstance would justify this kind of extreme global response?
That's the critical question, Sarah, and we don't have an answer yet. In 79 years of covering international affairs through various networks and platforms, I've never seen anything approaching this level of coordinated government action. Not during the Cold War, not during global health crises, not during any previous international emergency. The fact that adversarial nations, allies, and non-aligned countries all took identical action within the same time window suggests either an existential threat we haven't been informed about or a level of international cooperation that frankly shouldn't be possible given current geopolitical tensions.
We're getting reports now from our correspondents on the ground in multiple cities. In New York, crowds are gathering at JFK International Airport, where at least 200 flights have been canceled in the last 30 minutes. Security personnel are struggling to manage thousands of angry and frightened passengers. Similar scenes are unfolding at LAX in Los Angeles, O'Hare in Chicago, and Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta. The FAA has confirmed that all international departures from U.S. airports have been suspended indefinitely. Domestic flights are still operating, but we're hearing that may change.
I want to provide some context on the scale of what we're discussing. On an average day, approximately 100,000 commercial flights operate worldwide, carrying roughly 10 million passengers. The global aviation industry moves about 4 billion passengers annually. The economic impact of a complete shutdown of international travel would be approximately $14 billion per day. That's just aviation. We're not yet calculating the impact on international trade, shipping, tourism, or the countless industries that depend on cross-border movement. The Port of Los Angeles, the busiest container port in North America, has just announced that 47 cargo ships currently at sea have been ordered to return to their ports of origin.
But beyond the economics, David, we need to focus on the human crisis that's developing. We're now 32 minutes into this situation, and the reality is setting in for millions of people that they cannot get home. I'm seeing social media posts from people all over the world sharing their stories. A teacher from Melbourne stuck in Bangkok with a tour group of teenagers. A businessman from Sao Paulo stranded in Frankfurt. A nurse from Manila who was visiting her sister in Dubai and now cannot return to her children. These are real people whose lives have been turned upside down in an instant.
We have just received an official statement from the White House. I'm going to read this in its entirety. Quote, the president has authorized the immediate closure of all U.S. borders in coordination with international partners. This action is necessary to ensure national security and the safety of all American citizens. We understand this creates hardship for travelers and families. The State Department will provide assistance to Americans abroad through embassy services. All citizens are advised to remain calm, follow local authorities' instructions, and monitor official channels for updates. This is a temporary measure implemented in response to developing circumstances. Further information will be provided as the situation permits. End quote.
David, that statement raises more questions than it answers. What developing circumstances? What threat requires every country on Earth to seal its borders simultaneously? The lack of transparency here is fueling panic. People need to know what they're dealing with. Is this a security threat, a biological threat, something we haven't even considered? The speculation on social media is running wild, and without official information, people are filling the void with their worst fears.
You're absolutely right, Sarah. In the absence of verified information, we're seeing conspiracy theories spread rapidly online. I want to be clear with our viewers. We will only report confirmed facts from reliable sources. What we can confirm at this moment is that border closures are being enforced with military precision across every continent. We have visual confirmation of armed military personnel at major border crossings in Europe, Asia, Africa, North and South America. In some locations, barriers and checkpoints that had been removed years ago or even decades ago are being rapidly reconstructed.
We're approaching the 1 hour mark since this began, and I'm looking at images from the U.S.-Mexico border at San Diego, Tijuana, one of the busiest land border crossings in the world. Thousands of people who cross daily for work are now being turned back. The economic corridor between these two cities processes approximately 50,000 vehicle crossings and 25,000 pedestrian crossings every single day. Those people are now stuck. Workers who live in Tijuana and work in San Diego cannot get to their jobs. American citizens who were visiting family in Mexico cannot come home.
Let me provide an update on the aviation situation because we're getting more detailed information now. The International Air Transport Association has confirmed that approximately 9,000 commercial flights currently airborne have been ordered to land at the nearest suitable airport. This is creating massive congestion at airports that are being forced to accommodate planes they weren't expecting. Frankfurt Airport is reporting that they've received 43 unscheduled arrivals in the last 45 minutes. Tokyo Narita is experiencing similar strain. The logistics of housing, feeding, and processing tens of thousands of unexpected passengers is overwhelming ground services.
And David, these stranded passengers have no idea how long they'll be waiting. Are we talking days, weeks, longer? We're hearing from travelers who have mortgages to pay, jobs they need to get back to, children who need to be picked up from school in cities they can't reach. A viewer named Robert Hernandez just sent us a message saying his wife is in London for a business conference, and their 3 children are with a babysitter in Denver. The babysitter was only supposed to watch them for 2 days. What happens now?
The State Department has activated emergency protocols at all U.S. embassies and consulates worldwide. They're establishing temporary shelters for stranded American citizens, but the resources are limited. The U.S. Embassy in Paris typically handles routine passport and visa services for a manageable number of daily visitors. They are now facing potentially thousands of Americans seeking emergency assistance. Similar situations are developing at every embassy of every nation around the world. The infrastructure simply wasn't designed for a crisis of this magnitude.
I want to share another viewer message because I think it captures what so many people are feeling right now. This is from Elizabeth Tran in Seattle. I'm watching this with my 8-year-old daughter. She's asking me why people can't go home. I don't know what to tell her. I don't understand it myself. We're supposed to fly to Vancouver next week to see her grandparents. Will that even be possible? I'm scared and I'm angry that no one will explain what's happening. Elizabeth, we're asking the same questions, and we promise to get you answers as soon as they become available.
We're now 1 hour and 17 minutes into this crisis, and we're starting to see secondary effects beyond the immediate travel disruptions. Stock markets in Asia, which were in their trading day when the announcement came, have suspended trading due to extreme volatility. The Nikkei in Tokyo dropped 23% before the circuit breakers halted transactions. The Hang Seng in Hong Kong fell 18%. Currency markets are in chaos. The euro has fallen 8% against the dollar in less than an hour. Global economic systems are built on the assumption of open borders and free movement of goods, services, and capital. That assumption has just been shattered.
But, David, while we're talking about markets and economics, I think we need to remember that behind every canceled flight and closed border, there's a human story. We've been showing footage from airports, but I want our viewers to see something else. This is video from the border between Poland and Ukraine. These are families who have relatives on both sides. They're standing at the border barriers, separated by just a few meters, unable to touch, unable to cross. There's an elderly woman here who's reaching towards someone on the other side. This is the human cost of these decisions.
You're right to keep that perspective, Sarah. We have a responsibility to cover both the macro implications and the individual impacts. Speaking of which, we've just received casualty reports from several locations where the sudden border closures created dangerous situations. At the Pakistan-India border at Wagah, there was a crush incident when thousands of people rushed the checkpoint simultaneously trying to cross before the closure was complete. Local authorities are reporting 27 people injured, including 5 seriously. Similar incidents are being reported at the Kenya-Tanzania border and at several crossing points along the U.S.-Mexico border.
27 injured, David, and we're less than 90 minutes into this. I'm worried about what the numbers are going to look like as this continues. We're also hearing reports of people attempting to cross borders illegally, taking dangerous routes through remote areas. In Arizona, Border Patrol is reporting a surge of attempted crossings in the desert regions. These are dangerous territories even under normal circumstances. People are going to get hurt. People are going to die trying to get home to their families.
The humanitarian concerns are mounting rapidly. The United Nations has issued a statement calling for calm and urging nations to maintain humanitarian corridors. But so far, there's been no indication that any country is willing to make exceptions. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees has pointed out that there are currently 219 million international migrants worldwide, many of whom are now cut off from their countries of origin. Additionally, there are 32 million refugees who were already displaced. This border closure effectively strands all of these populations wherever they currently are.
We need to talk about families, David. Mixed nationality families where parents and children hold different passports. A father with a U.S. passport and his children with their mother's French passport, now separated if they were traveling separately. We're getting reports of parents being allowed to cross borders, but their children being denied because they hold different citizenship. Immigration attorneys are calling this a legal nightmare with no precedent in modern international law.
From a legal perspective, Sarah, this raises profound questions about international treaties and agreements. The Schengen Agreement in Europe, which has allowed passport-free travel between 27 European countries since 1995, has effectively been suspended. NAFTA and its successor USMCA, which facilitate trade and travel between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, are in limbo. Dozens of bilateral and multilateral agreements governing everything from trade to refugee protection have been unilaterally set aside. The legal framework of international relations, as we've known it for the past 70 years, has been upended in less than 2 hours.
And we still don't know why. That's what's so frightening about this, David. If our governments told us there was a specific threat, a virus, a security concern, something concrete that required this response, people could process that. They could understand it even if they didn't agree. But this silence, this coordinated action without explanation, it's terrifying. It suggests our leaders know something they're not telling us, and that's fueling every kind of speculation and fear.
We're now approaching the 2-hour mark. I want to give you an update on what we're seeing in major cities around the world. In London, Prime Minister's office has announced that all British nationals currently abroad will receive consular support, but there is no timeline for repatriation. In Beijing, the Chinese government has stated that the border closure is indefinite and necessary for national security. With no further elaboration, Moscow has deployed additional troops to its western borders. Every capital is providing the same message. Borders are closed, no exceptions, no timeline, no detailed explanation.
We've been receiving hundreds of messages from viewers, and I want to read a few more because they illustrate the scope of this crisis. From Daniel Rodriguez in Miami, my mother is 82 years old and she's in Mexico City visiting family. She has heart medication that will run out in 4 days. How is she supposed to get home? From Jennifer Liu in San Francisco, my fiancé proposed to me yesterday in Paris. Today we were supposed to fly home to start planning our wedding. Now we're stuck here with nowhere to stay, and our money is running out. From Marcus Peterson in Atlanta, I'm a truck driver. I transport goods between the U.S. and Canada. What am I supposed to do now? How do I pay my bills?
Those are the questions millions of people are asking, Sarah, and right now there are no good answers. What we can tell you is that various government agencies are working to establish emergency protocols. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has been activated. The Department of Homeland Security is coordinating with state and local authorities. But the reality is that no government agency, no matter how well funded or well staffed, was prepared for a scenario in which every international border closes simultaneously. This is beyond the scope of any existing emergency response plan.
We're getting reports now of shortages beginning in some areas. International supply chains have been disrupted. Grocery stores in countries that rely heavily on imported food are seeing panic buying. In Singapore, which imports 90% of its food, supermarkets are reporting that shelves are emptying as people stockpile essentials. Similar reports from Japan, the United Kingdom, and other import-dependent nations. David, this is how quickly modern societies can start to unravel when the systems we depend on are suddenly interrupted.
The supply chain issue is critical, Sarah. Let me give you some numbers. Global maritime shipping moves approximately 11 billion tons of goods annually. That's about 90% of world trade by volume. The Port of Shanghai, the world's busiest container port, has just announced that 178 cargo ships currently at sea bound for Shanghai have been ordered to turn back. Similar announcements from Rotterdam, Singapore, and Long Beach. The ripple effects of this are going to be felt in every store, every factory, every business that depends on international commerce, which is essentially all of them.
And while we're talking about shipping containers and trade volumes, I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the people who work in these industries. Container ship crews, airline personnel, truck drivers, port workers. These are people whose livelihoods depend on open borders. A cargo ship crew that's been ordered to turn around mid-ocean, they're now sailing back to a port they left weeks ago with no idea when they'll have another assignment. An airline pilot who was expecting to fly a regular route to Tokyo is now grounded indefinitely. These are people with families to support, and their entire industry has just been shut down.
We're 2 hours and 40 minutes into this situation, and we're starting to see civil unrest in several cities. In Paris, protesters have gathered at the Place de la République demanding answers from the government. In New York, demonstrators are marching toward the United Nations headquarters. These are not violent protests at this point, but they represent growing public frustration with the lack of transparency. People want to know what threat is so severe that it requires imprisoning millions of travelers in foreign countries and shutting down global commerce.
I'm looking at live footage from that protest in Paris, David, and these are just ordinary people, families with children, elderly couples, young students. They're holding signs asking why and tell us the truth. This isn't political extremism. This is citizens demanding that their governments treat them with basic respect by explaining what's happening. When you implement policies that affect billions of people, you have an obligation to tell them why.
We have breaking news from the World Health Organization. I'm reading this statement as it comes in. The WHO Director General has released a brief statement saying, quote, "The World Health Organization has been consulted by member nations regarding current border closure measures. We can confirm this is not related to any known infectious disease outbreak. We urge calm and continuation of essential health services. WHO remains committed to global health security and transparency," end quote. So, Sarah, the WHO is explicitly stating this is not a pandemic or biological threat. That eliminates one major area of speculation.
That's significant, David. It tells us what this isn't, even if it doesn't tell us what it is. If it's not a health crisis, then we're looking at either a security threat, perhaps terrorism or military concerns, or something else entirely. The fact that the WHO felt the need to make this statement suggests they're aware of public panic and they're trying to prevent a repeat of the fear we saw during previous health emergencies. But eliminating one possibility just opens up a dozen others.
Correct. And I should note that several major health organizations are echoing the WHO's statement. The CDC has confirmed that U.S. borders are not closed due to disease concerns. The European Center for Disease Prevention and Control has issued similar guidance, so we can definitively rule out a biological threat as the cause of these closures. That narrows the field, but we're still without a clear answer about what triggered this coordinated global response.
We're getting reports of power outages in several regions. It's unclear if this is related to the border closures or coincidental, but cities in northeastern Brazil are experiencing blackouts. Parts of southern India have lost power. These could be unrelated infrastructure issues, but the timing is concerning. David, one of my great fears about a crisis like this is how quickly essential services can break down when the systems that support them are disrupted.
You're right to be concerned, Sarah. Modern electrical grids, water systems, and telecommunications networks are interconnected across borders in many regions. The European power grid, for example, spans multiple countries and requires coordination to maintain stability. If that coordination breaks down due to border closures affecting personnel or communication, we could see cascading failures. The blackouts you mentioned, we're working to confirm whether they're related to the border situation, but it's a legitimate concern.
I want to read another viewer message. This is from Patricia Yamamoto in Portland. I'm a dialysis patient. I receive treatment 3 times a week. The equipment and supplies for my dialysis center come from a manufacturer in Germany. If shipments stop, people like me will die. This isn't an inconvenience. This is life and death. Patricia, thank you for sharing that. It's a stark reminder that international supply chains aren't just about consumer goods. Medical equipment, medications, components for life-saving treatments, these things cross borders every single day. If that stops, people will die.
We need to be clear-eyed about the potential casualties if this situation extends beyond a few days. The pharmaceutical industry is global. Many medications are manufactured in one country using components from several others and then distributed worldwide. India produces about 20% of the world's generic medications. China manufactures a significant portion of active pharmaceutical ingredients. If those supply chains are severed, countries that depend on imported medications will face shortages within weeks. We're talking about drugs for heart disease, diabetes, cancer treatment, HIV, and countless other conditions.
This is getting very real, very fast, David. We're 3 hours into a border closure, and we're already talking about medication shortages and potential deaths. How many people around the world are like Patricia, dependent on treatments that rely on international supply chains? How many people are going to die if this continues? These are questions our governments need to answer. They need to tell us what threat is so severe that it's worth risking these consequences.
We have new information on casualty numbers from the border incidents. Authorities at the India-Pakistan border have updated their figures. The earlier crush incident has now resulted in 43 injured and 2 fatalities. Those are the first confirmed deaths related to the border closures. Additionally, we're receiving reports of multiple injuries at the Greece-Turkey border where similar crowding occurred. The Greek Coast Guard is also reporting that several boats carrying people attempting to cross the Aegean Sea have capsized. Search and rescue operations are underway, but at least 6 people are missing and presumed drowned.
2 confirmed deaths and 6 missing. David, we said earlier that people would die trying to get home, and it's already happening. These are people who were so desperate to cross a border, to reach their families, to get back to their lives, that they took risks that cost them everything. And the tragedy is that we still don't know if this border closure is even justified. We don't know what we're being protected from. We just know that people are dying in the attempt to overcome it.
The death toll will likely rise, Sarah. We're hearing reports from the Arizona desert that Border Patrol has found 3 individuals suffering from severe dehydration after attempting to cross through remote areas. They've been transported to hospitals, but their conditions are critical. Similar reports are coming from the Sahara Desert region near the Morocco-Algeria border and from mountainous areas in the Balkans. When people become desperate, they take dangerous routes. And in many cases, those routes are dangerous for good reason.
We need to talk about what happens when night falls in different parts of the world. It's already evening in Europe and nighttime in parts of Asia. We're seeing reports from cities where stranded travelers are sleeping in airports, train stations, and public spaces because hotels are fully booked or they can't afford extended stays. In Delhi, the airport terminal has become a temporary shelter for an estimated 5,000 people. In Rome, Fiumicino Airport is similarly overwhelmed. These facilities don't have the resources to house and feed thousands of people indefinitely.
The logistics are staggering. A major international airport might have food service capacity for its normal passenger throughput, but when you have thousands of people camped out for an extended period, those resources are inadequate. We're hearing that some airports are running low on basic supplies. Water, food, blankets, basic sanitation facilities. The Red Cross and other humanitarian organizations are mobilizing to provide assistance, but the scale of the need is overwhelming. This is happening simultaneously at hundreds of airports, train stations, and border crossings worldwide. And
I'm looking at images from Frankfurt Airport right now, David, and it's heartbreaking. Families sleeping on benches, children crying, elderly people trying to rest on hard floors. These are not refugees fleeing war zones. These are tourists, business travelers, ordinary people who were just living their lives yesterday. Now they're displaced, stranded, scared, with no idea when they can go home. The psychological impact of this is going to be enormous.
We're approaching the 4-hour mark, and I want to update you on the economic situation because the numbers are becoming clearer. Financial analysts are estimating that the global economy is losing approximately $28 billion every hour that international borders remain closed. That accounts for halted trade, canceled flights, disrupted supply chains, and lost productivity. If this situation continues for 24 hours, we're looking at nearly $700 billion in economic damage. If it extends to a week, the global economy could contract by several trillion dollars.
But David, when we talk about economic damage, we're really talking about people's lives. Jobs lost, businesses closing, families unable to pay their bills. $1 trillion contraction translates into millions of people unemployed, unable to feed their families, losing their homes. The human cost of economic collapse is just as real as the direct casualties we've been reporting. We can't separate the economics from the human impact because they're the same thing.
Absolutely right, Sarah. And we're already seeing the beginning of that impact. Several major airlines have announced they're furloughing employees immediately. British Airways is sending home 75% of its workforce. Lufthansa is implementing similar measures. These are tens of thousands of jobs disappearing within hours. The cruise industry, which was already struggling to recover from previous setbacks, has announced the immediate suspension of all operations worldwide. That's another 100,000 jobs at minimum. The unemployment numbers are going to be catastrophic.
We have a new viewer message I want to share. This is from Thomas Brennan, who identifies himself as a small business owner in Minneapolis. I run an import business. I have $200,000 worth of merchandise on cargo ships that have been turned around. I have customers who've paid for products they're not going to receive. I have employees I can't pay. My business is finished. 20 years of work gone in one afternoon because of a decision nobody will explain. Thomas, I don't have any words of comfort for you. Your anger is justified. Your fear is justified. You deserve answers.
We're receiving reports that several governments are implementing emergency economic measures. The European Central Bank has announced an emergency stimulus package worth 500 billion euros. The Federal Reserve has cut interest rates to near zero and implemented quantitative easing measures. The Bank of Japan is taking similar action. Central banks understand that without intervention, we're looking at a global economic collapse that would make previous recessions look minor by comparison. These are extraordinary measures for an extraordinary crisis.
David, I think what's most disturbing about all of this is that it's happening so fast. 4 hours ago, the world was normal. Planes were flying, borders were open, people were living their lives. Now we have deaths, economic collapse, millions of people stranded, and civil unrest beginning in major cities. How does everything fall apart this quickly? It makes you realize how fragile our modern civilization really is, how dependent we are on systems that can be turned off like a light switch. And
that's the fundamental lesson of globalization, Sarah. We've built a world that's deeply interconnected and remarkably efficient, but that efficiency comes at the cost of resilience. When you have supply chains that span continents, just-in-time manufacturing that maintains minimal inventory, and systems that depend on constant movement of goods and people, you create vulnerabilities. We're seeing those vulnerabilities exposed in real time. The question is whether our governments understood these risks when they made the decision to close borders, and whether they decided the alternative was worse.
That's what haunts me, David. What could be worse than what we're experiencing right now? What threat is so severe that our leaders decided this chaos, these deaths, this economic devastation was the better option? Because that's what their silence is telling us. They've made a calculation that whatever they're protecting us from is worse than stranded families, medication shortages, and economic collapse. And they won't tell us what that threat is.
We have an update on the power outages. The blackouts in Brazil and India have been confirmed as infrastructure failures related to cross-border power grid management. In both cases, electricity generation or transmission involves facilities in multiple countries, and the sudden closure of borders has prevented technicians from accessing critical infrastructure. The power outages are affecting approximately 40 million people in Brazil and 70 million in India. Authorities are working to restore service, but the access issues created by the border closures are complicating repair efforts.
110 million people without power, David. That's on top of everything else. And it's getting dark in those regions. No electricity means no refrigeration for food and medicine, no air conditioning in hot climates, hospitals running on backup generators that have limited fuel supplies. This is a cascading disaster. One decision, one policy creates a chain reaction of failures that affects hundreds of millions of people.
We're getting reports from multiple countries of runs on banks. People are withdrawing cash en masse, fearing that financial systems might fail. ATMs in several European cities have run out of cash. Banks in Tokyo and Seoul are limiting withdrawals. This is a classic panic response, and it's exactly the kind of thing that can turn a crisis into a catastrophe. If confidence in financial institutions collapses, the electronic systems that underpin modern commerce break down. We're seeing the early warning signs of that breakdown.
And people are scared, David. They're watching their governments close borders without explanation. They're seeing stranded travelers sleeping in airports. They're hearing about power outages and supply chain failures. Of course, they're going to withdraw their money. They're preparing for the worst because they have no idea what to expect. This is what happens when trust in institutions evaporates. People revert to survival mode, and those individual rational decisions collectively create bank runs and societal breakdown.
We're 5 hours in now. The United Nations Security Council has convened an emergency session. We're monitoring that, but initial reports suggest there's no consensus on how to address the border closures. The fact that all permanent members, the United States, China, Russia, France, and the United Kingdom, participated in the coordinated closure suggests this was a pre-arranged decision at the highest levels. But other member nations are demanding explanations and expressing outrage at being excluded from whatever decision-making process led to this.
So even within the international community, there's a divide between those who knew this was coming and those who were blindsided. That suggests a small group of powerful nations made this decision and imposed it globally. David, that raises serious questions about sovereignty and international law. Did smaller nations have a choice? Were they coerced, or did they participate willingly in exchange for information that we, the public, are not being given?
Those are exactly the right questions, Sarah. The geopolitics of this situation are complex. We know that typically adversarial nations acted in concert, which suggests either a shared threat perception or unprecedented coordination. The level of secrecy maintained prior to the announcement is remarkable. In an age of satellites, cyber intelligence, and leaks, the fact that this caught everyone by surprise indicates extraordinary operational security. Someone knew this was coming, someone planned it meticulously, and someone decided the public didn't need to know until it was already happening. Now,
I want to share more messages from viewers because they're reflecting the range of emotions people are feeling. From Angela Martinez in Houston, I'm terrified. My husband is in Germany for work, and our son has a surgery scheduled tomorrow. He needs his father. From David Park in Seattle, this is tyranny. Governments don't have the right to trap people wherever they happen to be. This violates every principle of freedom. From Lisa Chen in Boston, there must be a good reason. Our leaders wouldn't do this without cause. We need to trust them and wait for answers. You can see the spectrum of reactions: fear, anger, trust, confusion.
those reactions are all understandable, Sarah. We're dealing with an unprecedented situation, and people are processing it in different ways based on their circumstances and their worldview. What I can tell you from a factual standpoint is that the legal basis for these border closures is murky at best. International law recognizes the right of nations to control their borders, but there are also established norms around freedom of movement, family reunification, and humanitarian access. We're in uncharted territory, legally, ethically, and practically.
We have breaking news about casualties. Authorities in the Mediterranean are reporting that a refugee boat carrying approximately 80 people capsized while attempting to cross from Libya to Italy. The Italian Coast Guard has recovered 17 bodies so far, with dozens still missing. It's not clear if these individuals were attempting to cross because of the border closure or if this was a pre-planned journey, but the timing suggests panic played a role. These are people who were already desperate, and the border closures may have pushed them to take even greater risks.
That brings our confirmed death toll to 19, with dozens more missing and presumed dead. And Sarah, these numbers are going to increase. We're hearing reports from border regions in Africa, Asia, and Latin America of similar dangerous crossing attempts. When you create a situation where millions of people are suddenly trapped away from home with no legal means of return, some percentage of them are going to attempt illegal crossings. Given the scale of displacement we're seeing, we could be looking at hundreds or thousands of casualties before this is resolved.
19 confirmed dead, David, and we're only 5 hours in. How many more will die before our governments decide to explain what's happening? How many families will be destroyed? How many children will lose parents? These aren't abstract statistics. Every one of those deaths is someone's loved one, someone who woke up this morning not knowing this would be their last day. The human cost of secrecy is measured in lives, and right now that cost is climbing.
We're getting reports of violence at some border crossings. At the Poland-Belarus border, frustrated travelers attempted to force their way through the checkpoint. Military personnel fired warning shots, and there are reports of injuries from rubber bullets. Similar confrontations are occurring at the Hungary-Serbia border and at several points along the U.S.-Mexico border. When large crowds of desperate people are met with military force, violence becomes almost inevitable. The situation is deteriorating from a humanitarian crisis into a security crisis.
This is exactly what I was afraid of, David. Peaceful protests turning into confrontations, desperate people taking desperate measures, armed military personnel feeling threatened and responding with force. This is a powder keg, and it's ready to explode at dozens of locations around the world simultaneously. How long before we see a massacre? How long before frightened soldiers fire into a crowd or angry protesters overwhelm a checkpoint? The potential for mass casualties is enormous.
The role of military forces in this situation is concerning from several perspectives. In democratic nations with civilian-controlled militaries, using armed forces against civilian populations is a last resort, reserved for extreme circumstances. The fact that it's happening now at multiple locations suggests either that the threat justifying these closures is extraordinarily severe, or that governments are overreacting to civil unrest. Either way, it represents an escalation that could have tragic consequences.
We're 6 hours into this crisis now, and I think it's important to step back and summarize what we know and what we don't know. We know that every nation on earth has closed its borders simultaneously. We know this was coordinated at the highest levels of government. We know approximately 4 million travelers are stranded. We know supply chains are disrupted, power outages are affecting over 100 million people, and economic damage is measured in hundreds of billions of dollars. We know 19 people are confirmed dead with dozens missing. What we don't know is why any of this is happening.
That's the critical summary, Sarah, 6 hours in, and the fundamental question remains unanswered. I want to read you another official statement we just received. This is from the United Nations Secretary General. The United Nations calls on all member states to provide humanitarian access for stranded individuals and to maintain essential services across borders. We recognize the security concerns that may have prompted current measures, but we urge transparency and protection of human rights. The international community must work together to resolve this situation with minimal harm to civilian populations. That's as close as we've gotten to an acknowledgement that this is about security concerns.
Security concerns, that's something, David, even if it's vague, not a pandemic, not a natural disaster, but security. That could mean terrorism, military threats, cyber warfare, espionage, any number of possibilities. But why would a security threat require closing every border on Earth? What could be so pervasive, so dangerous, that the only solution is to stop all international movement? I'm struggling to imagine a scenario that fits these facts.
There are a few possibilities, Sarah. A coordinated terrorist network with cells in multiple countries planning simultaneous attacks, a cyber threat that affects border security systems, foreign agents or operatives that governments want to prevent from moving between countries, an imminent military conflict that hasn't been made public. All of these are speculation, but they're scenarios that might justify the kind of response we're seeing. The troubling aspect is that if any of these were the real reason, you'd think governments would say so to maintain public support.
Unless they can't say so without making the situation worse. If there are terrorist cells planning attacks, publicizing that might trigger them to act immediately. If there's a cyber vulnerability, announcing it might expose the weakness to exploitation. If military conflict is imminent, public knowledge could cause panic or interfere with strategic planning. Maybe the silence isn't arbitrary, maybe it's necessary, but that doesn't make it any less frightening for the millions of people affected.
We have an update on the economic situation. The International Monetary Fund has released emergency projections. If borders remain closed for 72 hours, they estimate global GDP will contract by 2.4%. If closures extend to 1 week, the contraction increases to 4.7%. For context, the global financial crisis of 2008 resulted in a 0.1% contraction. We're looking at an economic catastrophe that could dwarf anything in modern history. The IMF is urging immediate action to reopen trade corridors at minimum, even if passenger travel remains restricted.
2.4% doesn't sound like much when you say it like that, David, but in human terms, it's devastating. That's millions of jobs lost, businesses closing, families plunging into poverty. And that's just the immediate impact. The long-term consequences of a contraction like this would include reduced health care, education, infrastructure investment, all the things that make societies function. The ripple effects would last for years, possibly decades. The decision to close borders isn't just affecting people today, it's mortgaging our collective future.
We're receiving reports that some countries are beginning to implement rationing systems. Japan has announced that grocery stores will limit purchases of certain essential items to prevent hoarding. The United Kingdom is considering similar measures. This is a rational response to supply chain disruptions, but it's also an indicator of how quickly we've moved from normal operations to crisis management. Rationing is something associated with wartime or natural disasters. We're now in that territory after just 6 hours.
And the psychological impact of rationing shouldn't be underestimated, David. When people see limits on food purchases, even if supplies are currently adequate, it triggers survival instincts. It reinforces the sense that we're in a crisis, that normal life has ended, that we need to prepare for worse to come. This can create a feedback loop where fear drives behavior that makes the crisis worse. People hoard more aggressively, tensions increase, trust in institutions declines further. It's a downward spiral.
We're 7 hours into this situation now, and protests are growing in size and intensity. In Washington, D.C., an estimated 50,000 people have gathered outside the Capitol building demanding answers from Congress and the administration. Similar large-scale protests are occurring in London, Paris, Berlin, Tokyo, and dozens of other major cities. These are not small demonstrations. We're seeing hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets globally, united in their demand for transparency and for borders to reopen.
I'm watching live footage from the protest in Washington, and David, these people are angry, but they're not violent. They're holding candles, signs, pictures of loved ones they're separated from. There's a woman holding a photo of what looks like her elderly mother with the words "stranded in Manila" written underneath. A man with a sign saying, "My wife is in Madrid, my daughter needs her mother." These are people exercising their democratic right to petition their government for redress of grievances. They deserve to be heard.
The government's response to these protests will be telling, Sarah. In democracies, peaceful assembly is a protected right, but we've already seen military force used at borders. If that same approach is taken with domestic protesters, we're looking at a constitutional crisis on top of everything else. The tension between security concerns, whatever they are, and civil liberties is becoming acute. How governments navigate that tension will define the nature of this crisis going forward.
We have another viewer message I need to read. This is from Maria Constantinou in Athens. My brother was one of the people who drowned trying to cross from Turkey. He was coming home to see our mother, who was dying of cancer. He didn't drown in some distant sea. He drowned trying to cross between two civilized countries because someone decided he couldn't use a bridge that was open yesterday. My family's grief is because of this policy. Our governments killed him. Maria, I am so deeply sorry for your loss. Your grief and your anger are valid. Your brother deserved better. We all deserve better.
That message is absolutely devastating, Sarah, and it underscores the human cost in the most direct terms. Every casualty number we report represents someone like Maria's brother, someone who made a desperate choice and paid with their life, someone who left behind family members who will grieve and question and never fully understand why this happened. We're now at 20 confirmed deaths from drownings in the Mediterranean and Aegean, and those numbers will rise as search operations continue.
20 deaths, David, and we're 7 hours in. At this rate, how many will we be reporting tomorrow? How many next week if this continues? We're watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion, and the worst part is that it feels preventable. If our governments would just explain what's happening, just give people information and hope, maybe we could prevent some of these desperate decisions. But the silence continues and people keep dying.
We have breaking news regarding infrastructure. Major internet service disruptions are being reported across multiple continents. Undersea fiber optic cables that carry international data traffic require maintenance and monitoring from facilities in different countries. The border closures are preventing technicians from accessing critical infrastructure. Additionally, some governments appear to be restricting international internet traffic. We're seeing significant slowdowns in connection speeds, and some services are becoming unavailable across borders.
So now we're losing our ability to communicate across borders? David, the internet has been one of the few things holding our global society together through this crisis. People stranded in foreign countries have been able to video call their families, check in, let loved ones know they're safe. If we lose that, the psychological impact will be enormous. The isolation, the fear, the inability to connect with the people you love, it's cruel.
The internet disruptions also affect our ability to report this story, Sarah. International news organizations depend on data connections to transmit video, coordinate coverage, and communicate with correspondents around the world. If those connections degrade further, we may lose real-time information about what's happening in other countries. We could see information silos develop where each nation only knows what's happening within its borders. That would make this crisis even harder to understand and resolve.
We're getting reports of looting in several cities. In Sao Paulo, grocery stores have been broken into and stripped of food. Similar reports from Cairo, Lagos, and Manila. This is what happens when people lose faith that normal systems will provide for their needs. They take matters into their own hands. It's not excusable, but it's understandable when you're watching supply chains collapse and your government won't tell you how long the crisis will last or if help is coming.
The breakdown of civil order is always a concern in extended crisis situations, Sarah. Law enforcement resources are already stretched thin, managing protests, border security, and the logistics of stranded travelers. When you add property crimes and looting to that burden, police forces become overwhelmed. We're seeing that in multiple cities where response times to emergency calls have increased significantly. The social fabric is under immense strain.
We're 8 hours into this nightmare, and I keep thinking about all the normal things that aren't happening right now. Families aren't having dinner together because they're separated across borders. Children are going to bed tonight without their parents. People are dying alone in hospitals without their loved ones able to reach them. Weddings are canceled, graduations missed, final goodbyes that will never be said. The emotional toll of this extends far beyond the direct casualties and economic damage.
You're absolutely right, Sarah. There's a dimension to this crisis that can't be quantified in economic terms or casualty figures. The psychological trauma of sudden separation, the anxiety of not knowing when or if you'll see your loved ones again, the violation of trust between citizens and their governments. These wounds will take years to heal, if they ever fully heal. We're not just watching a crisis unfold, we're watching the traumatization of billions of people in real time.
I want to read one more message before we take a brief pause. This is from Rebecca Okonkwo in London. I'm a nurse. I was visiting family in Lagos when the borders closed. The hospital where I work is short-staffed. People in London need me, my patients need me, but I'm stuck here while people I care for are going without treatment. This isn't just personal. This policy is killing people indirectly through the healthcare workers, supply chain workers, and essential personnel who can't do their jobs. Rebecca makes an excellent point that we haven't fully explored yet, David. And
She does, Sarah. The displacement of essential workers is creating secondary crises, healthcare workers stranded away from their jobs, power plant operators unable to reach their facilities, food distribution personnel trapped on the wrong side of borders. Modern societies depend on specialized workers being in specific places to maintain critical systems. When you suddenly relocate millions of people randomly based on where they happen to be traveling, you create gaps in essential services that can have cascading fatal consequences.
we'll continue our coverage after a brief station identification. When we return, we'll have updates on the casualty numbers, economic impact, and any new information about why this is happening. We're 8 hours and 17 minutes into the global border closure, and we're committed to staying with this story until we have answers. This is Sarah Donovan.
And David Hale will be right back on What If News with continuing coverage of this developing crisis.
We're back with continuing coverage of the global border closure, now entering our 9th hour. David, while we were away, did we receive any new information from official sources?
Sarah, we have received a joint statement from the G7 nations. That's the United States, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom. I'm going to read this carefully because it's the most detailed official communication we've received so far. Quote, "The coordinated border closure implemented today is a necessary response to an urgent security situation. We cannot provide specific details without compromising ongoing operations. We ask for public patience and cooperation. Essential services will be maintained. Stranded travelers will receive consular assistance. We are working to resolve this situation as quickly as possible while ensuring the safety of all citizens. Further updates will be provided within the next 12 hours." End quote.
12 hours, David. So we're asking people to wait until tomorrow morning for more information while they're sleeping in airports, separated from their families, and watching their worlds fall apart. I understand operational security, I do, but we're 9 hours into a crisis that's killed at least 20 people, stranded millions, and triggered economic collapse. Is 12 more hours of silence really necessary? What operations are so sensitive that they can't even hint at what's happening?
The statement does confirm what we suspected, Sarah. This is a security situation requiring ongoing operations that suggest active efforts to address whatever threat prompted the closures, whether that's military, intelligence, law enforcement, or some combination. The 12-hour timeline might indicate they expect those operations to conclude or reach a critical phase at that point. But you're right that it's asking a lot of people who are suffering right now to simply trust and wait.
We've updated our casualty count. The drownings in the Mediterranean have now reached 32 confirmed deaths, with an estimated 40 to 50 people still missing. Additionally, we have reports of 4 people who died in the crush incidents at various border crossings. 3 people have died in the Arizona desert attempting illegal crossings. That brings our confirmed death toll to 39, with dozens more missing and likely dead. David, we're approaching 40 deaths in less than 9 hours. And
those numbers are tragic, Sarah, and they represent a baseline of casualties directly attributable to the border closures and people's reactions to them. What we're not yet seeing reflected in official counts are the indirect casualties. People who died because they couldn't access medication, individuals who suffered medical emergencies while stranded without proper care, and the healthcare system failures resulting from displaced personnel and supply shortages. Those deaths will emerge in the coming days and weeks, and the true toll will be far higher than current figures suggest.
We're getting reports from hospitals in multiple countries of critical shortages developing, not just medications, but basic supplies, surgical gloves, disinfectants, IV bags, ventilator components. These items are manufactured globally and distributed through international supply chains that are now severed. A hospital administrator in Toronto just sent us a message saying they have approximately 48 hours of critical supplies remaining. After that, they'll have to make decisions about which patients receive care and which don't.
That's a nightmare scenario for healthcare workers, Sarah. Triage based on supply shortages rather than medical need is something you expect in war zones or after natural disasters, not in modern developed nations. But that's where we're headed if the supply chain disruptions continue. The healthcare system is one of the most supply-intensive sectors of the economy. Hospitals maintain limited inventory specifically because they've relied on just-in-time delivery. That efficiency is now a critical vulnerability.
I'm looking at images from protests that have now spread to smaller cities across America. It's not just Washington, D.C. anymore. We're seeing demonstrations in Chicago, Denver, Phoenix, Seattle, dozens of cities. People are gathering in town squares, outside government buildings, at major intersections. They're peaceful so far, but the crowds are growing, and the anger is palpable. When you see this many people taking to the streets simultaneously, it tells you that faith in government has reached a breaking point.
We're seeing similar patterns globally, Sarah. Mass protests are occurring in virtually every major city on Earth: London, Paris, Berlin, Moscow, Beijing, Tokyo, Seoul, Sydney, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, everywhere. The remarkable thing is that despite different political systems, different cultures, different languages, people are expressing the same fundamental demands: transparency, answers, and the reopening of borders. There's a unity of purpose across the global population that transcends traditional divisions.
And yet our governments remain unified in their silence, David. That coordination itself is remarkable. Think about how difficult it is to get countries to agree on climate policy, trade agreements, or international law. But somehow every government on Earth has agreed to close borders and maintain secrecy about the reasons. That level of cooperation on such a dramatic policy suggests whatever threat they're responding to is either extraordinarily severe or they're all responding to pressure from a small number of powerful actors.
We have new information about the internet disruptions. Several major tech companies have released statements confirming that international data traffic has been restricted by government order in multiple countries. Encryption protocols for cross-border communications are being monitored or blocked. Social media platforms are experiencing service degradation. This appears to be a deliberate effort to control information flow between countries, not just an infrastructure failure. Sarah, this is starting to look like information warfare or preparation for it.
And that's deeply concerning, David. If governments are actively restricting communications, it suggests they're worried about information spreading that they don't want spread. But what information? Are they worried about panic, about coordination between protest movements, about foreign intelligence gathering? Or is there information about the actual threat that they're trying to contain? Every new development raises more questions than it answers.
We're 10 hours into this crisis now, and we're seeing the first signs of food distribution problems in some regions. The United Arab Emirates, which imports 90% of its food, is reporting that supermarkets are running low on fresh produce and dairy products. Singapore, similarly dependent on imports, is facing the same issues. These are wealthy nations with resources to address shortages, but they're vulnerable because of their reliance on international trade. Less developed nations that depend on food imports are going to face severe shortages within days.
We're going to see famine, aren't we, David? If this continues for weeks, countries that can't feed themselves from domestic production are going to run out of food. Millions of people could starve because of a policy decision made in comfortable government offices by people who have never missed a meal. The cruelty of it is staggering. You can't close the borders that feed the world and expect everyone to just survive on whatever happens to be within their borders at that moment.
The geography of food production is complex, Sarah. Some nations are net exporters, producing more than they need. Others are net importers, dependent on trade for basic nutrition. In a normal global system, that distribution works efficiently. Food moves from surplus regions to deficit regions through trade. But when you sever those connections, you create abundance in some places and scarcity in others. The food exists globally, but it can't reach the people who need it. That's a policy-induced famine. And yes, people will die from it if this continues.
We have another viewer message that I think captures the desperation people are feeling. This is from Ahmed Hassan in Dubai. I'm a construction worker from Pakistan. I've been working in Dubai for 6 years, sending money home to support my family. I was supposed to return home next month to see my children. Now I'm trapped here, and my work visa is expiring soon. If I can't go home and I can't stay here, where am I supposed to go? What happens to people like me? Ahmad, I wish I had an answer for you. You represent millions of migrant workers in similar situations.
The migrant worker population is one of the most vulnerable groups in this crisis, Sarah. There are an estimated 169 million migrant workers globally. Many are on temporary visas, living in countries where they have limited rights, working to support families back home. The border closures have trapped them in legal limbo. They can't go home, but their permission to remain in their current location may be temporary. When those visas expire, they face deportation to countries whose borders are closed. It's a paradox that has no legal resolution.
And let's not forget that many of these migrant workers send remittances home, money they earn in wealthy countries that supports families in developing nations. Those remittances total about $700 billion annually. That's more than all foreign aid combined. If migrant workers can't work or can't send money home, families that depend on those funds will be plunged into poverty. The economic impact cascades from the individual to the family to the community to entire national economies.
We're getting reports that several countries have declared states of emergency. France has activated emergency powers, allowing the government to impose curfews and restrict assembly. Italy has done the same. These are democracies suspending normal civil liberties in response to the unrest triggered by the border closures. When you combine closed borders with restricted domestic movement and limited freedom of assembly, you have conditions that approach martial law. The trajectory is concerning.
This is how democracies die, David, not with a coup or a revolution, but with emergency measures implemented during a crisis that never get revoked. I'm not saying that's happening now, but the precedent being set is dangerous. Once governments have demonstrated they can close borders, restrict communications, and suspend civil liberties, what's to stop them from doing it again? How do we ensure this is truly temporary and not the new normal?
That's a question that should concern everyone, Sarah. The powers being exercised right now exist in most democratic constitutions for genuine emergencies. The question is whether this qualifies as that kind of emergency, and we can't answer that without knowing what threat we're facing. If there's an imminent attack that threatens millions of lives, these measures might be justified. If the threat is less severe, or if there were alternative responses available, then we're watching an overreach that will have lasting consequences for democratic governance.
We're 11 hours into this crisis, and I want to update everyone on the human toll. Confirmed deaths have reached 43. An estimated 80 people are missing and presumed dead from drownings and desert crossings. Hundreds have been injured in crush incidents and border confrontations. Millions are displaced and stranded. Economic damage exceeds $300 billion and is climbing rapidly, and we still have no clear explanation for why any of this is happening. Those are the facts as we know them at 11 hours.
We have breaking news about a developing situation in Eastern Europe. There are reports of military mobilization along the Russian-Ukrainian border beyond the forces normally stationed there. Satellite imagery, which we're working to verify, appears to show tank columns and artillery units moving into position. This could be unrelated to the border closures, or it could be connected. If the security situation that prompted the closures involves geopolitical tensions or potential military conflict, this deployment could be significant.
David, are we looking at the possibility of war? Is that what this is about? Did our governments close borders because they knew military conflict was imminent and they wanted to prevent the movement of forces, weapons, or intelligence? That would explain the secrecy. That would explain the coordination. That would explain why they're willing to accept the economic and human costs. They're preparing for something worse.
It's speculation at this point, Sarah, but it's plausible speculation. Military conflict between major powers would be catastrophic. The economic damage from closed borders would pale in comparison to the casualties and destruction of actual war. If closing borders prevents or limits the scope of such a conflict, the calculus might favor these measures despite the terrible costs we're witnessing. But we need to be careful not to jump to conclusions. We're monitoring the situation in Eastern Europe closely for any developments.
We need to talk about what happens to people's mental health during a crisis like this. We're hearing from psychologists and mental health professionals who are overwhelmed with people experiencing panic attacks, severe anxiety, and depression, triggered by the sudden separation from loved ones and the uncertainty about the future. Suicide prevention hotlines are reporting call volumes 3 to 4 times normal levels. David, the psychological casualties of this crisis may ultimately exceed the physical casualties.
Mental health is a critical but often overlooked aspect of crisis response, Sarah. The trauma of sudden displacement, enforced separation from family, and existential uncertainty about the future creates psychological wounds that can last a lifetime. We're seeing reports of children separated from parents who are exhibiting signs of severe distress, adults stranded in foreign countries experiencing breakdowns. The long-term mental health consequences of this will require years of treatment and support that our healthcare systems may not be equipped to provide.
I want to share a message from Dr. Jennifer Martinez, who identifies herself as a clinical psychologist in Los Angeles. She writes, "I've been in practice for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what I'm witnessing today. I've had patients in crisis all day, people who were mentally healthy yesterday who are now experiencing acute psychological distress. The helplessness, the lack of control, the absence of information, these are triggers for severe anxiety and depression. Our mental health care system cannot handle this volume of acute need. People are going to die by suicide because of this policy." That's a sobering warning from a medical professional, David.
It is indeed, Sarah. And it highlights another dimension of the casualty count we're tracking. We have direct deaths from drownings, crush incidents, and border crossings. We have indirect deaths from healthcare system failures and medication shortages. And we have psychological casualties that may manifest in self-harm and suicide. The true death toll from this crisis will take months or years to calculate accurately, but it will certainly be far higher than the 43 confirmed deaths we're reporting now.
We're 12 hours into this crisis. 12 hours, half a day, and the world is barely recognizable compared to this morning. We have military forces at borders, protesters in the streets, economic systems in freefall, people dying, families separated, and governments maintaining an information blackout. If this is what 12 hours looks like, what will 24 hours look like? What will a week look like? I'm genuinely afraid of the answer to those questions.
Your fear is rational, Sarah. We're on a trajectory that leads to further deterioration across multiple dimensions. The economic contraction will deepen. Shortages will become more severe. Civil unrest will likely escalate. Casualties will mount. Unless something changes, unless borders reopen, or at minimum we receive a credible explanation that allows people to understand and accept these measures, we're headed toward a breaking point. Societies can absorb a certain amount of shock, but there are limits. We may be approaching those limits.
We have reports of violence escalating at some protest sites in Paris. Riot police have used tear gas and water cannons to disperse protesters. In Moscow, security forces have arrested hundreds of demonstrators. In Chicago, there have been confrontations between police and protesters that have resulted in injuries on both sides. David, when peaceful protests are met with force, the protesters often respond with force of their own. We could be entering a cycle of violence that becomes self-sustaining.
The use of force against protesters is always a critical decision point in a civil unrest situation, Sarah. It can either suppress the movement or inflame it, depending on how it's perceived by the public and how protesters respond. What we're seeing in multiple cities is governments choosing suppression, which suggests they're more concerned about maintaining order than about public opinion. That's a significant shift from the usual democratic calculus where governments try to balance security with political considerations. It implies they view the current situation as existential.
We're getting word that internet access has been completely shut down in several countries. Iran, North Korea, and Myanmar have severed international internet connections entirely. Other countries are implementing severe restrictions. China has activated its Great Firewall to block most international traffic. Russia is routing all data through government-controlled systems. This is information control on a massive scale, David. They're creating isolated information environments where citizens only know what their governments want them to know.
The internet shutdowns are extremely concerning, Sarah. In the 21st century, access to information is fundamental to human rights, economic activity, and social cohesion. When governments can simply turn off access to global information networks, they can control narratives, suppress dissent, and operate without accountability. We're seeing the digital equivalent of closing borders, except this affects information rather than people. The combination of physical border closures and digital isolation creates conditions similar to historical periods before globalization.
I think we need to acknowledge something that's been implicit in our coverage, but maybe needs to be stated explicitly. The world we knew this morning is gone. Whether these border closures last days, weeks, or longer, the psychological impact of knowing that governments can and will do this has permanently changed how we think about freedom, security, and the social contract between citizens and the state. Even if borders reopen tomorrow, we can never go back to the innocent assumption that they'll always be open.
That's a profound observation, Sarah. You're right that this represents a before and after moment in history. Future generations will discuss the world before the closures and the world after. The demonstration that coordinated global action of this magnitude is possible, that governments can override individual rights and economic interests in the name of security. That's a genie that can't be put back in the bottle. The precedent has been set, the capability has been proven. That changes everything about how we understand the relationship between state power and individual liberty.
We're 13 hours in now, and I want to read you a statement we just received from the International Red Cross. Quote, "The ICRC is gravely concerned about the humanitarian impact of current border closures. We call on all governments to establish humanitarian corridors for medical personnel, patients requiring urgent care, and individuals facing life-threatening situations. International humanitarian law requires protection of civilian populations during crises. We stand ready to facilitate humanitarian access and provide emergency services, but we need cooperation from national authorities." End quote.
The Red Cross involvement is significant, Sarah. They typically engage in conflict zones, natural disasters, and humanitarian emergencies. The fact that they're issuing statements and offering services in this context suggests they view this as a humanitarian crisis on par with war or disaster. Their call for humanitarian corridors is something we haven't seen any government willing to implement yet. Every nation has maintained that the closures are absolute with no exceptions. The Red Cross is essentially asking for a policy change that contradicts the current approach.
And they should ask for it, David. People are dying from preventable causes because they can't access medical care across borders. A child with cancer who needs treatment available in another country, an accident victim who needs to be medevaced to a trauma center across a border, a pregnant woman with complications who needs a specialist that exists 50 miles away but in a different country. These are life and death situations where humanitarian corridors could save lives. The refusal to create them is a choice to let people die.
We have an update on the economic situation. The New York Stock Exchange, which suspended trading earlier, has announced it will not reopen tomorrow. Stock markets in Europe and Asia are also extending suspensions. This is unprecedented in peacetime. The last time markets closed for an extended period was immediately after September 11th, 2001, and that was for 4 days. We're now looking at an indefinite closure of global financial markets. The implications are staggering. Without functioning markets, companies can't raise capital, investors can't adjust positions, and the price discovery mechanism that underpins capitalism ceases to function.
So, in addition to everything else, the financial system is freezing up. David, modern economies run on credit, investment, and liquidity. If markets are closed and banks are limiting withdrawals, businesses can't operate normally. They can't make payroll, can't pay suppliers, can't access the capital they need for daily operations. How many businesses will fail in the next few days? How many millions of jobs will be lost? The economic devastation compounds with every hour this continues.
The cascade of economic failures is already beginning, Sarah. We're getting reports of businesses announcing bankruptcy, unable to access credit or conduct international transactions. Airlines are filing for bankruptcy protection. Shipping companies are suspending operations. Tourism-dependent economies are in free fall. The Maldives, which derives 95% of its GDP from tourism, has essentially lost its entire economy overnight. Similar situations in the Caribbean, in Mediterranean resort destinations, in Pacific Island nations. Entire economies have simply stopped functioning.
We have a viewer message from someone who works in one of those tourism-dependent economies. This is from Carlos Mendoza in Cancun, Mexico. I work at a resort. This morning we had 800 guests. This evening we have 0. Everyone who could leave has left. Everyone who can't leave is at the airport trying. The resort has told us there's no work until further notice. I have a family to feed. I have rent to pay. My entire city depends on tourists from America and Europe. Without them, we have nothing. How am I supposed to survive? Carlos raises a critical point about the geographic distribution of economic pain.
The economic impact of these closures is not evenly distributed, Sarah. Some regions and nations are devastated while others are less affected depending on their economic structure. Tourism-dependent areas, like Carlos describes, are experiencing complete economic collapse. Manufacturing centers that depend on imported components are shutting down production lines. Agricultural regions that export perishable goods are watching their products rot because they can't reach markets. Meanwhile, some self-sufficient communities and regions that produce what they consume are less immediately affected. The inequality of impact is creating different experiences of this crisis across the globe.
We're 14 hours into this nightmare, and I want to take a moment to think about the children. There are millions of children who went to school this morning not knowing that when they came home they might not see one or both parents for an indefinite period. Children who are stranded with one parent while the other is trapped in a foreign country. Children in boarding schools whose parents can't reach them. The psychological impact on a generation of children who are experiencing this trauma will shape who they become as adults.
The intergenerational impact is something we haven't fully addressed, Sarah. Children experiencing separation anxiety and trauma today may carry those wounds for decades. They're learning that the world is unpredictable and unsafe, that their parents can't protect them from arbitrary government decisions, that security is an illusion. These lessons, learned at a formative age, will influence their relationship with authority, their trust in institutions, and their sense of safety in the world. We're not just dealing with a crisis that will end when borders reopen. We're dealing with trauma that will echo through generations.
We have breaking news about the situation in Eastern Europe that David mentioned earlier. NATO has issued a statement saying it's monitoring the military movements along the Russian-Ukrainian border with concern. The alliance has activated its rapid response force and is consulting with member nations about potential responses. This is the closest we've come to an official acknowledgement that military tensions might be related to the border closures. David, if NATO is activating response forces, we're in extremely dangerous territory.
This is a significant development, Sarah. NATO's rapid response force consists of approximately 40,000 troops that can deploy on short notice. The activation of this force is reserved for serious security threats. Combined with the observed Russian military movements, we're looking at a potential military crisis in Eastern Europe, simultaneous with the global border closure. Whether these events are causally linked or coincidentally timed is still unclear, but the convergence is deeply troubling.
Could the border closures be preparation for military conflict? Close all borders, isolate populations, control information, then engage in military action. David, that's a terrifying scenario, but it fits the facts we have. It would explain the secrecy, the coordination, the willingness to accept enormous economic and humanitarian costs. If governments know that war is imminent, they might calculate that closed borders reduce the scope and intensity of the conflict by limiting the movement of forces and populations.
It's a plausible hypothesis, Sarah. In previous conflicts, one of the challenges has been the movement of refugees. the displacement of populations, and the cross-border effects of warfare. If you're planning military operations, isolating the conflict zone by closing borders in advance could be a strategic calculation. However, we should be cautious about assuming this is the explanation without more evidence. We're pattern matching to make sense of limited information, and we could be wrong. But your scenario is consistent with what we're observing.
We're getting reports of increasing violence at multiple locations. In Brazil, protesters have set fire to government buildings in Brasilia. In South Africa, there's been looting and property destruction in Johannesburg. In Indonesia, crowds have overwhelmed police in Jakarta and taken control of several neighborhoods. David, we're seeing the breakdown of civil order in major cities around the world. This is beyond protest. This is approaching anarchy in some places.
The transition from protest to violence to anarchy can happen quickly once trust in authority collapses, Sarah. When people believe their governments have betrayed them or are withholding critical information that affects their survival, they may conclude that normal rules no longer apply. We're seeing that calculation play out in real time. People are taking food, supplies, and control of territory because they don't trust that official systems will provide for their needs. Once that process begins, it's very difficult to reverse without either addressing the underlying grievances or imposing order through force.
And imposing order through force just escalates the violence, doesn't it? It's a vicious cycle. People protest, governments respond with force. People escalate to violence, governments respond with more force. And suddenly you have low-intensity civil conflict in multiple cities simultaneously. How many people are going to die in these confrontations before either governments back down or protesters give up? Neither side seems willing to budge, and the casualties are mounting.
We're approaching the 15-hour mark, and our casualty count has risen sharply. In addition to the drownings and border crossing deaths, we now have at least 18 people confirmed dead in protest-related violence across multiple countries. That brings our total confirmed deaths to 61. With the missing persons from drownings, we're estimating the true death toll is already over 130. And Sarah, these numbers are going to increase substantially as violence escalates and indirect effects like healthcare failures begin to manifest.
130 people dead in 15 hours, David. We're averaging nearly 9 deaths per hour, and the rate is accelerating as the crisis intensifies. By this time tomorrow, we could be looking at hundreds dead. Within a week, thousands. And for what? We still don't know. Every one of those deaths is someone's child, parent, spouse, friend. Everyone represents a family destroyed, a community grieving, a life ended for reasons our governments won't explain.
We have a statement from the World Food Program, the United Nations agency responsible for humanitarian food assistance. Quote, WFP is deeply concerned about the impact of border closures on food security in vulnerable regions. We are currently unable to deliver emergency food aid to populations in conflict zones and famine-affected areas due to border restrictions. Millions of people who depend on international food aid are at risk of starvation. We urgently call for humanitarian exemptions to allow food shipments to reach those in need, end quote.
Millions at risk of starvation, David. People who are already hungry, already suffering, who depended on international aid to survive. The border closures have cut off their lifeline. How long can someone survive without food? A few weeks at most. If these closures continue for a month, we could be looking at mass starvation in multiple regions. South Sudan, Yemen, parts of Syria, northeastern Nigeria. These are areas where millions depend entirely on food aid. Without it, they die. It's that simple and that horrific.
The ethical calculation here is brutal, Sarah. If the threat that prompted these closures is severe enough, governments may have concluded that some casualties are acceptable to prevent a greater catastrophe. But without knowing what that threat is, we can't evaluate whether that calculation is justified. Are 100 dead acceptable to prevent 1,000 dead, 1,000 to prevent 1,000,000? The problem is that we're being asked to accept casualties without being told what we're being protected from. That's not informed consent. That's authoritarianism.
We're 16 hours in now, and I want to share something personal, if I may, David. I've been a journalist for 23 years. I've covered wars, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, epidemics. I've seen human suffering up close and reported it objectively because that's my job. But this is different. This isn't a natural disaster we can blame on nature or a war we can trace to political grievances. This is a deliberate policy decision made by our own governments that is causing enormous suffering. And I'm angry. I'm angry that we're being kept in the dark while people die. I'm angry that families are separated. I'm angry that we're expected to just trust that this is necessary without any evidence.
Your anger is shared by billions of people around the world, Sarah, and it's a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation. The social contract between citizens and governments is based on mutual obligations. Governments provide security and order. Citizens grant them authority and consent. But when governments exercise extraordinary power without transparency or accountability, that contract is violated. People have every right to be angry, to demand answers, to withdraw their consent if those answers aren't forthcoming. That's not anarchism, that's basic democratic principle.
We're getting reports that some countries are considering unilateral border reopening. New Zealand's Prime Minister has suggested that if no credible explanation is provided within 24 hours, New Zealand will reopen its borders regardless of international pressure. Several smaller European nations are expressing similar sentiments. This could be the beginning of the coalition fracturing, David. If some countries defect from the coordinated closure, the entire policy could unravel.
That would be a significant development, Sarah. The border closures work as a global policy because they're universal. If some countries reopen while others remain closed, you create safe havens and travel routes that could undermine whatever security objective prompted the closures in the first place. New Zealand's threat to defect might be a negotiating tactic to pressure larger powers for information, or it might be genuine intent. Either way, it demonstrates that even among cooperating nations, there are limits to how much domestic pain governments are willing to accept for unclear international security goals.
We have a viewer message from someone in New Zealand. This is from Emma Patterson in Auckland. I'm proud of our Prime Minister for standing up and demanding answers. New Zealanders are stranded around the world, and we deserve to know why. If our government doesn't get an explanation, we should absolutely reopen our borders and bring our people home. Other countries' secrets are not worth our citizens' suffering. Emma speaks for a lot of people who are frustrated with the lack of transparency.
We're 17 hours into this crisis, and we need to address something that's been developing over the last few hours. There are reports of cyber attacks on government infrastructure in multiple countries. Banking systems have been targeted. Power grid control systems have experienced intrusion attempts. Government communication networks have been compromised. It's unclear if these attacks are related to the border closures or if they're opportunistic actions by hostile actors taking advantage of the chaos. Either way, they represent an additional layer of crisis.
Are we under attack, David? Is that what this is about? Did our governments close borders because they knew a massive cyber attack was coming and they wanted to limit the attacker's ability to move people and resources? Or are these attacks happening now because our defenses are stretched thin dealing with the border crisis? The timing can't be coincidental, but I don't know which direction the causation runs.
Both scenarios are possible, Sarah. If governments had intelligence about a planned cyber offensive, closing borders might disrupt the attacker's ability to coordinate or deploy physical assets to compromise systems. Alternatively, hostile actors might be exploiting the current chaos to launch attacks they've been planning. There's also a third possibility. Some of these attacks might be false flag operations by governments themselves to justify the border closures retroactively. Without more information, we're speculating, but the cyber dimension adds complexity to an already complex situation.
We're hearing reports of power outages spreading. Earlier, we mentioned localized blackouts in Brazil and India. Now we're getting reports from France, Germany, South Korea, and Australia. These are sophisticated, stable power grids that don't typically fail simultaneously. If these outages are connected to the cyber attacks David just mentioned, We could be looking at a coordinated effort to destabilize critical infrastructure globally. David, this is terrifying.
The vulnerability of critical infrastructure to cyber attack is a known issue that security experts have warned about for years, Sarah. Power grids, water systems, financial networks, all of these operate on digital control systems that can potentially be compromised. If a sophisticated actor wanted to create chaos and demonstrate the fragility of modern civilization, attacking infrastructure during an existing crisis would be an effective strategy. We're monitoring these developments closely and will update viewers as we learn more.
We're 18 hours into this crisis. 18 hours ago, I was planning what to make for dinner tonight. I was thinking about weekend plans. Life was normal. Now we're talking about cyber warfare, infrastructure collapse, mass starvation, and bodies washing up on Mediterranean beaches. The speed of societal breakdown is staggering. If you told me this morning that by tonight we'd be in the middle of a global crisis with over 100 people dead and civilization teetering, I wouldn't have believed it was possible.
The fragility of complex systems is often invisible until they fail, Sarah. We built a global civilization based on interconnection, efficiency, and just-in-time logistics. That system works brilliantly under normal conditions, but it has almost no resilience to shocks. When you disrupt the flows of people, goods, information, and capital simultaneously, the entire structure becomes unstable very quickly. What we're witnessing is not an aberration. It's a demonstration of the inherent vulnerabilities in how we've organized modern society.
I want to read a statement we just received from a coalition of international human rights organizations. Quote, "The coordinated border closures implemented by governments worldwide constitute a mass violation of human rights, including freedom of movement, family unity, and access to essential services. Without clear justification and oversight, these measures cannot be considered lawful or proportionate. We call on the International Criminal Court and United Nations Human Rights Council to investigate these actions and hold responsible parties accountable. Governments cannot indefinitely detain millions of people without charge or explanation." End quote.
That statement raises important legal questions, Sarah. In international law, restrictions on movement can be justified for security reasons, but they must be necessary, proportionate, and temporary. The lack of transparency about the justification makes it difficult to assess whether these standards are being met. If it eventually emerges that the threat didn't warrant such extreme measures, or that there were less restrictive alternatives available, there could be legal accountability for government officials who implemented these policies. We're potentially talking about crimes against humanity if the actions can't be justified.
Crimes against humanity. David, that's a strong charge, but when you consider the scale of suffering, the deaths, the separation of families, the economic devastation, all implemented without explanation or accountability, it's not an unreasonable characterization. At some point, the absence of justification becomes evidence of wrongdoing. You can't do this much harm to this many people and hide behind national security indefinitely. There has to be a reckoning.
We're approaching the 19-hour mark, and we have an update on the death toll. The confirmed number of deaths from all causes related to the border closures has reached 83. This includes drownings, border crossing attempts, crush incidents, and protest violence. Additionally, we're now receiving reports of deaths from medication shortages. A diabetic man in Singapore died when he ran out of insulin. A heart patient in Dubai died without access to critical medication. These are the indirect casualties we warned about earlier. The true toll is estimated to be over 170.
170 people dead in less than a day, David. And that number doesn't include the people who will die in the coming days from starvation, from healthcare system failures, from violence that's still escalating. We could be looking at thousands dead within a week, tens of thousands if this continues longer. At what point does the cure become worse than the disease? At what point do our governments acknowledge that whatever they're protecting us from, the protection itself is killing us?
That's the fundamental question, Sarah, and it's one that governments will have to answer eventually. The G7 statement promised more information within 12 hours, which means we should hear something within the next few hours based on when that statement was issued. That update could change everything. If they provide a credible explanation for a severe threat that justifies these measures, public opinion might shift toward acceptance, even if grudging. If the explanation is inadequate or if no update is provided as promised, the legitimacy crisis will deepen.
We're getting reports of military movements in multiple regions beyond the Eastern European situation we mentioned earlier. China has deployed naval assets in the South China Sea. India and Pakistan have both increased troop presence along their border. North Korea has moved artillery into forward positions. David, this looks like multiple potential conflicts developing simultaneously. Are we witnessing the setup for a world war?
The military posturing we're seeing is extremely concerning, Sarah. When tensions are high and communication is limited, the risk of miscalculation increases dramatically. A single incident, a border shooting, a naval collision, a misinterpreted radar signal could trigger a chain reaction of escalation. The fact that multiple potential flashpoints are active simultaneously means there are multiple opportunities for something to go catastrophically wrong. This is one of the most dangerous global security situations since the Cold War.
I think we need to prepare our viewers for the possibility that we might be on the brink of a major war. I don't want to fearmonger, but the evidence is mounting. Coordinated border closures, military deployments, cyber attacks, information blackouts, these are all consistent with preparation for large-scale conflict. If war breaks out, everything we've experienced in the last 19 hours will seem minor in comparison. We could be looking at millions of casualties, entire cities destroyed, potentially nuclear escalation. David, I'm scared.
Your fear is rational, Sarah. The pattern of events is consistent with pre-war preparation, though we can't be certain that's what we're witnessing. What I can tell you is that military and intelligence agencies would absolutely close borders if they had intelligence about imminent conflict. They would want to control population movement, secure strategic resources, and limit adversaries' ability to position assets. The economic and humanitarian costs would be secondary considerations compared to national survival. If that's the calculation being made, it explains the actions, even if it doesn't justify the secrecy.
We're 20 hours into this crisis now, 20 hours of fear, confusion, death, and societal breakdown. We're exhausted. Our viewers are exhausted, but we're committed to continuing this coverage until we have answers. David, what do you think happens in the next few hours? Do we get the promised update from the G7? Do borders start to reopen? Does violence escalate further? Where is this headed?
Based on current trajectories, Sarah, I expect we'll see continued escalation across multiple dimensions. Civil unrest will intensify as people's fear and anger build. Economic systems will continue to freeze up. Casualties will mount. The question is whether we reach a breaking point that forces governments to change course or whether they maintain their current position despite growing costs. The promised G7 update is critical. If it provides substantive information and a timeline for resolution, that could stabilize the situation. If it's vague or if it doesn't materialize, we could see a rapid acceleration of breakdown.
We have reports that some protests are turning into organized resistance movements. In several cities, protest organizers are setting up alternative governance structures, food distribution networks, and mutual aid systems. They're essentially creating parallel institutions to replace government functions that have failed or become untrustworthy. David, this is how revolutions begin. When people stop looking to official authorities for support and start organizing their own solutions, you have the seeds of societal transformation.
That's a significant observation, Sarah. The creation of alternative institutions during crisis is a hallmark of revolutionary movements throughout history. When official systems fail to meet people's needs, they create their own systems. If those alternative institutions prove more effective or more trustworthy than official ones, they can become permanent replacements. We may be witnessing the beginning of that process in multiple countries simultaneously, whether it leads to revolution or whether governments can restore trust and functionality remains to be seen.
We're getting word of a major development. The President of the United States is scheduled to address the nation in 30 minutes. This will be the first direct communication from the President since the border closures began 20 hours ago. David, this could be the explanation we've been waiting for. This could be the moment when we finally understand what's happening and why.
This is potentially the most important speech since the crisis began, Sarah. The president will either provide information that justifies the border closures and restores public trust, or will deliver a message that's inadequate to the moment and further erodes confidence in government. The stakes could not be higher. We'll continue our coverage and bring you the president's address live when it begins. In the meantime, let me summarize where we stand as we approach the 21st hour.
Please do, David. I think our viewers need a comprehensive overview of the situation.
At 21 hours since the global border closure began, here's what we know. Every nation on Earth has closed its international borders simultaneously, stranding approximately 4 million travelers. Confirmed deaths have reached 83, with estimated true toll over 170 when including missing persons and indirect casualties. Economic damage exceeds $600 billion. Supply chains are severely disrupted, causing shortages of food, medicine, and essential goods. Power outages are affecting over 200 million people globally. Major protests are occurring in virtually every major city worldwide, with some turning violent. Military mobilizations are underway in multiple regions, raising fears of potential conflict. Cyber attacks on critical infrastructure have been reported. Financial markets remain closed indefinitely. What we still don't know is the fundamental question: why is this happening?
Thank you for that summary, David. It's sobering to hear it all laid out like that. 21 hours, and we've gone from normal life to global crisis affecting billions of people. And in 9 minutes, we may finally get some answers. I want to share one more viewer message before the president speaks. This is from Michael Torres in Philadelphia. I've been watching your coverage all day. Thank you for staying with this story and for being honest about what you know and what you don't know. Whatever the president says, I trust you to help us understand it. We're all scared. We need the truth. Michael, we appreciate your trust, and we promise to continue providing honest, factual coverage.
We're 5 minutes away from the president's address. While we wait, I want to note that similar addresses are being prepared by leaders of other major nations. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom will speak shortly after the U.S. President. The German Chancellor, French President, Japanese Prime Minister, and Chinese President all have addresses scheduled within the next few hours. This coordinated communication strategy suggests they've agreed on what information to release and when. Whether that information will be sufficient to answer the questions people have been asking for 21 hours remains to be seen.
2 minutes until the president speaks. David, I'm nervous. I think everyone watching is nervous. We're about to hear information that could change everything. Information that might explain the deaths, the suffering, the fear, or information that might make things worse. I don't know which outcome I'm more afraid of.
Here we go, Sarah. The president is approaching the podium. We'll listen to this address in its entirety and then provide analysis afterward. This is the President of the United States.
The president has concluded the address. David, I need a moment to process what we just heard.
Take your time, Sarah. For our viewers who may have missed it, let me summarize what the president just said. The border closures were implemented in response to credible intelligence about a coordinated global terrorist network planning simultaneous attacks across multiple continents using biological weapons. The attacks were scheduled to occur using international transportation systems as vectors for distribution. By closing borders and grounding international flights, authorities prevented the attacks from being executed. Over the past 21 hours, law enforcement and intelligence agencies in 73 countries have conducted coordinated raids, arresting over 2,000 suspects and seizing weapons and materials. The president stated that the threat has been neutralized and borders will begin reopening within 48 hours through a phased process prioritizing humanitarian cases and essential services.
A biological weapons attack, David. They were trying to prevent a biological weapons attack. If what the president says is true, if those attacks would have killed millions of people, then the border closures, as painful as they've been, might have been justified. But David, I have so many questions. Why couldn't they tell us this from the beginning? Why did they let people panic and die and suffer without explanation? Even if they couldn't reveal operational details, they could have told us it was a security threat, that we were being protected, that there was a plan.
Those are fair questions, Sarah. The president addressed some of them, saying that revealing the nature of the threat could have prompted the terrorists to accelerate their timeline or change their methods, potentially making the attacks impossible to prevent. The element of surprise was crucial to the successful raids. I understand the logic, but I also understand your frustration. The cost of secrecy, as we've documented throughout our coverage, has been measured in lives, economic damage, and psychological trauma. Whether that cost was necessary or whether alternative approaches could have achieved the same security outcome, that's a question we'll be debating for a long time.
The president said 2,000 suspects arrested. David, that's an enormous operation conducted in secret across dozens of countries over 21 hours. If that's true, it represents an intelligence and law enforcement achievement of unprecedented scale, but it also raises questions about surveillance, international cooperation, and the methods used to identify and track these individuals. We'll need to dig deeper into how this operation was conducted and what legal standards were applied.
Absolutely, Sarah. And we should note that the president promised a full declassification of information about the threat and the response within the next week, subject to security review. That should provide more details about the nature of the biological weapons, the terrorist network involved, and the specific plans that were disrupted. Until we see that information, we're taking the president's statement on faith, which after 21 hours of being kept in the dark is asking a lot of people who have lost trust in their governments.
We're getting immediate reactions from around the world. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, who earlier threatened to unilaterally reopen borders, has issued a statement saying if the threat was as severe as described, the coordinated response was appropriate. However, New Zealand expects full transparency about the intelligence and the operations conducted. We will participate in the phased border reopening, but will be seeking independent verification of the claims made tonight. That's measured support, but with significant skepticism, David.
That reflects what I expect will be the broader public reaction, Sarah. Cautious acceptance of the explanation with demands for verification. People want to believe their governments acted in good faith to protect them, but after 21 hours of secrecy and suffering, trust is not easily restored. The proof will be in the details that emerge over the coming days and weeks. If the declassified information supports the president's account, public opinion may shift toward acceptance. If there are inconsistencies or if the threat appears to have been exaggerated, there will be accountability demanded.
We have viewer reactions coming in rapidly. From Jessica Palmer in Boston, if this was really about biological weapons, I understand why they closed borders, but my father is still stranded in Tokyo, and the president said it will be 48 hours before reopening starts. Why can't they start immediately if the threat is neutralized? From Robert Chen in San Francisco, I don't believe it. This seems like a convenient excuse after the fact. Where's the evidence? From Linda Morrison in Atlanta, thank God our government protected us. I'm sorry for what people went through, but better this than millions dead from a biological attack. You can see the range of reactions.
Those reactions span the spectrum from skeptical to supportive, which is natural given the circumstances, Sarah. What we need to focus on now is the practical reality of the border reopening process. The president outlined a phased approach, beginning with humanitarian cases, people needing urgent medical care, families with separated children, individuals facing life-threatening situations. Phase 2 would reopen borders for essential workers and commercial freight. Phase 3 would restore normal travel. The entire process is expected to take 7 to 10 days. For the millions of people currently stranded, that timeline means continued hardship, even though the acute threat has passed.
7 to 10 days, David. 7 to 10 more days of families separated, of people sleeping in airports, of economic damage accumulating. I understand the need for an orderly process, but every additional hour of closure is another hour of suffering for people who have already endured 21 hours of fear and uncertainty Can't this be accelerated? Don't we owe people that after what they've been through?
The logistical challenges of reopening borders for billions of people after a complete closure are substantial, Sarah. You can't simply turn the system back on like a light switch. Border control systems need to be reactivated, personnel need to be redeployed, security protocols need to be implemented to ensure that any remaining threats are identified. The phased approach, while frustrating for those still stranded, is probably necessary to prevent chaos and security lapses. But you're right that the human cost of delay is real and should be minimized wherever possible.
We're 22 hours into this crisis now, or perhaps I should say 22 hours into what we now know was a successful counterterrorism operation. David, how do we reconcile those two framings? Was this a crisis or a triumph? Were we victims of government secrecy or beneficiaries of government protection? I'm struggling with how to think about what we've experienced.
That's the central question we'll all be grappling with, Sarah. The answer likely depends on your personal experience and your prior level of trust in government. For someone whose family was separated or who lost a loved one in the chaos, this may always be remembered as a crisis and a failure, regardless of the threat that was prevented. For someone who was not directly affected and who accepts the government's account of a severe threat neutralized, this may be remembered as a necessary sacrifice that prevented catastrophe. The truth is probably somewhere in between. It was both crisis and response, both failure and success, both tragedy and triumph.
We have an update on the casualty count now that we're 22 hours in. Confirmed deaths related to the border closures and subsequent events have reached 97. Estimated true toll, including missing persons and unconfirmed reports, is approximately 220. David, those numbers are final in the sense that those people are gone, but they're not final in the sense that more people will die from injuries, from healthcare system failures, from the ongoing impacts of what happened today. The full accounting will take weeks or months.
You're right, Sarah. The death toll will continue to rise even as borders reopen. People with injuries from protests and crush incidents may succumb to their wounds. Individuals who couldn't access medication may die in the coming days. The psychological casualties, people who die by suicide from the trauma, will emerge over a longer timeline. And then there are the deaths that will occur in the reopening process itself, because mass movements of people always carry risks. The final toll could easily exceed 500, possibly more. Every one of those deaths is a tragedy, and everyone deserves to be counted and remembered.
The president mentioned that the biological weapons seized in the raids were capable of killing millions if deployed as planned. If that's true, David, if we really were hours away from a catastrophe that would have made this day look minor by comparison, then maybe the cost we paid was justified. But we'll never know for certain what would have happened because the attack was prevented. We can't compare the reality we experienced to the alternative reality that was prevented. That makes it very difficult to evaluate whether the government's decisions were correct.
That's the fundamental challenge of counterterrorism and preventive security measures, Sarah. Success is defined by what doesn't happen, by the attacks that are stopped, by the lives that are saved through actions the public never sees. The problem is that prevention is invisible. We see the costs of the security measures clearly, the deaths, the economic damage, the fear and suffering, but we can't see the prevented catastrophe except in hypothetical projections. That asymmetry makes it easy to criticize the costs and hard to appreciate the benefits. It's a dilemma with no perfect solution.
We're getting reports from multiple countries that the coordinated raids mentioned by the president resulted in significant violence. In Pakistan, a raid on a suspected terrorist safe house resulted in a firefight that killed 12 suspects and 3 law enforcement officers. In Germany, a suspect detonated explosives when police attempted to make an arrest, killing himself and 2 officers. In the Philippines, a raid resulted in a hostage situation that ended with 4 civilian casualties. David, these operations that were conducted while we were covering the border crisis had their own death toll that we're only now learning about.
Those operational casualties are significant, Sarah, and they need to be added to our overall accounting of the human cost of this situation. The president presented the raids as a clean success, 2,000 arrests with the threat neutralized. But the reality of counterterrorism operations is that they're violent and dangerous, and people die. The fact that these operations were conducted simultaneously across dozens of countries while the public was distracted by the border crisis is strategically sound but ethically complex. Should we have known that these raids were happening? Should the governments have been transparent about the ongoing operations? These are questions without easy answers.
We're now 23 hours since this began, 23 hours since normal life ended, and we entered this strange new reality. David, I keep thinking about the moment this morning when the first reports came in of border closures. It seemed impossible, surreal, like something from a movie. Now, 23 hours later, we have nearly 100 confirmed dead, an economy in free fall, societies on the edge of breakdown, and an explanation that raises as many questions as it answers. How did we get here? How do we process what we've experienced?
We got here through a combination of factors, Sarah. A genuine security threat that we now know about, government decisions made in secrecy for operational reasons, the fragility of our interconnected global systems, and the rapidity with which modern society can destabilize when normal patterns are disrupted. As for processing it, that will take time. We've experienced collective trauma on a global scale. Every person on Earth has been affected by today's events in some way, whether directly through separation from loved ones or indirectly through economic impact and psychological stress. Healing from that trauma will require acknowledgement, understanding, and probably fundamental changes to how we think about security, governance, and international cooperation.
The president said that over the next week, we'll receive detailed information about the terrorist network, their plans, and the operations that stop them. I hope that information is comprehensive and honest, David, because we need to understand what happened today, not just for closure, but to prevent it from happening again. If biological weapons capable of killing millions were in the hands of terrorists, we need to know how that happened, how they were detected, and how we ensure it doesn't happen again.
The accountability and learning process will be crucial, Sarah. There will be investigations, hearings, reports and analyses for months or years. We'll need to understand not just the threat and the response, but also whether alternative approaches could have achieved the same security outcome with less collateral damage. Could borders have been selectively closed instead of globally? Could more information have been shared with the public without compromising operations? Could the economic and humanitarian costs have been mitigated through better planning? These are the questions that serious analysis will need to address.
We have breaking news about the economic situation. Stock markets have announced they will reopen tomorrow with significant circuit breakers in place to prevent excessive volatility. The Federal Reserve and other central banks have coordinated to provide massive liquidity to financial systems to prevent collapse. Early projections suggest markets will open down 30 to 40%, representing trillions of dollars in lost value. David, even though the security threat has been neutralized, the economic consequences are going to be felt for years.
The economic recovery from this event will be long and painful, Sarah. We're looking at a global recession at minimum, possibly a depression, depending on how quickly confidence can be restored. The loss of wealth from market declines will affect pension funds, retirement savings, and institutional investors. The businesses that failed during the 23-hour closure won't come back. The jobs that were lost won't be immediately recreated. The supply chain disruptions will take weeks or months to fully resolve. We prevented one catastrophe only to create another of a different kind.
And the human cost of that economic catastrophe will be measured in lives too, won't it, David? Unemployment leads to poverty, poverty leads to malnutrition and lack of health care, which leads to preventable deaths. The economic damage from today will kill people indirectly over the coming years through mechanisms that are harder to trace, but just as real as the direct casualties we've been counting. How many deaths is this economic crisis worth to prevent the biological weapons attack? It's a horrible calculation, but it's one we have to make to evaluate whether the response was proportionate.
That calculation is exactly what governments had to make when they decided to close borders, Sarah. They had intelligence about an imminent attack that could kill millions. They had to weigh that against the certain cost of border closure, economic damage, humanitarian suffering, and yes, casualties from the chaos that would ensue. Based on the information available to them, they made the judgment that the prevented catastrophe justified the actual costs. Whether that judgment was correct, whether they had all the relevant information, whether they made the calculation ethically, these are the questions we'll be debating. But I can say this, if the biological weapons were real and the attack plans were credible, the math probably does support their decision, as painful as it is to acknowledge.
We're approaching the 24-hour mark. 24 hours since this began, a full day of fear, confusion, death, and eventually explanation. David, where do we go from here? The borders are opening over the next week. The economy is in shambles but recovering. The dead can't be brought back, but maybe the suffering can begin to heal. What does the world look like tomorrow and beyond?
The world that emerges from this will be fundamentally changed, Sarah. Trust in government has been shaken, even if the explanation provided turns out to be accurate and justified. People have learned that normal life can end instantly, that the systems we depend on are fragile, that security can require terrible sacrifices. Those lessons will influence everything from travel behavior to political attitudes to international relations. We may see renewed emphasis on self-sufficiency and reduced dependence on global systems. We may see stronger calls for government transparency and accountability. We may see changes to how counterterrorism operations are conducted and communicated, or we may see increased acceptance of security measures and decreased expectation of transparency. The direction we go depends on how we collectively process and respond to what happened today.
I want to read one final viewer message as we approach 24 hours. This is from Thomas Nguyen in Seattle. I've been watching your coverage all day and night. My wife is stranded in Vietnam, and I won't see her for at least another week. Based on what the president said, I'm angry about that. I'm angry about the suffering we've been through, but I'm also grateful that millions of lives were saved if what we're being told is true. I don't know how to feel. I'm just tired and sad and ready for this to be over. Thomas, I think you've expressed what millions of people are feeling. We're all tired. We're all sad. We're all ready for this to be over. And it will be over eventually. We will rebuild. We will recover. We will heal.
Let me provide a final summary as we reach the 24-hour mark of this unprecedented global crisis. At this moment, we have 97 confirmed deaths with estimated true toll of approximately 220. Economic damage is estimated at $1.4 trillion and climbing. Approximately 4 million travelers remain stranded, but will be processed for return over the next 7 to 10 days. The explanation provided by the president and other world leaders is that the border closures prevented a coordinated biological weapons attack that could have killed millions. 2,000 suspects have been arrested in coordinated raids across 73 countries. Border reopening will begin within 48 hours through a phased process. The full truth of what happened today will emerge over the coming weeks as promised declassification occurs and investigations proceed.
For those who lost loved ones today, for the families separated, for the workers who lost jobs, for the millions affected by this crisis, our hearts go out to you. Your suffering was real. Your grief is valid. Your anger is justified. Whatever the larger justifications for what happened, your individual pain matters and deserves to be acknowledged. We will continue to follow this story, to demand accountability, to seek truth, and to honor the memory of those who died by ensuring we learn the lessons of this day.
This has been continuous coverage of the global border closure from What If News. I'm David Hale.
And I'm Sarah Donovan. We've been with you for 24 hours covering this crisis as it unfolded, and we'll continue to provide updates as the situation evolves. Thank you for trusting us with this story. Stay safe, stay informed, and hold your loved ones close. We'll be back with continuing coverage tomorrow as borders begin to reopen and we move from crisis to recovery. Good night.
The final numbers from this 24-hour period are now complete. Confirmed deaths, 103. Missing and presumed dead, 147. Total estimated casualties, 250 lives lost. Economic damage, $1.6 trillion. Travelers stranded, 3.8 million. Countries involved in coordinated response, 195. Terrorist suspects arrested, 2012. Biological weapons seized, quantities sufficient to kill an estimated 8 to 12 million people based on deployment models.
That's what the numbers tell us, David. But numbers don't capture everything. They don't capture the mother who held her child's photo at a protest in Washington. They don't capture the stranded travelers sleeping on airport floors across the world. They don't capture the fear, the anger, the confusion, the relief, the grief. They don't capture the moment when trust broke between citizens and their governments, or the fragile hope that it might somehow be restored. They don't capture what it felt like to watch the world change in 24 hours.
What we experienced today was a demonstration of both the best and worst of human civilization, Sarah. The worst. Our vulnerability to catastrophic threats, the fragility of our systems, the terrible costs of secrecy, and the deaths of innocent people caught in circumstances beyond their control. The best, the courage of law enforcement and intelligence personnel who risked their lives to prevent a greater catastrophe, the resilience of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, and the potential for international cooperation even among adversaries when existential threats emerge. The world survived this day. 250 people did not. We honor them by learning from what happened and building something better from these ashes.
The story of what happened today will be told and retold for generations. It will be studied, debated, mythologized, and politicized. But at its core, it's a simple story about fear and protection, about secrets and trust, about the price of security and the cost of peace. It's a story about ordinary people living ordinary lives who suddenly found themselves in an extraordinary crisis they didn't ask for and couldn't control. It's a story about governments making impossible choices with insufficient information and inadequate options. It's a story about how quickly everything can change and how hard it is to put the pieces back together.
From What If News, covering the day the world closed its borders, prevented a catastrophe, and paid a terrible price, I'm David Hale. The borders will reopen, life will continue, but we will never forget this day, and we will never be quite the same. Thank you for allowing us to guide you through these 24 hours. We'll be here tomorrow as the recovery begins.
I'm Sarah Donovan. To everyone watching, everyone affected, everyone grieving, everyone grateful, everyone still processing what happened, we see you. Your experience matters. Your story is part of the larger story of this day. May we find wisdom in this tragedy. May we honor the dead by living better. May we never forget what we learned about the fragility of civilization and the resilience of the human spirit. Good night, and may tomorrow bring healing.